Prince William had made his decision about Queen Camilla's financial arrangements, and the people inside the palace, who first heard what he planned, understood immediately that nothing in the royal household would look the same again. On the surface, it appeared to be a quiet administrative correction, the kind of internal adjustment institutions make without notice. But beneath that calm language was the final consequence of a secret Camilla's former husband had carried for years, and had finally chosen to place directly before the king. And the question no one inside those walls could yet answer was whether Charles, once he knew what had been hidden, would choose the woman he loved, or the institution he had spent his life trying to protect. Before we go further, take a moment to subscribe, like the video, and stay with this story until the end, because what begins as a private financial review turns into something far bigger, and the final outcome may change the way you see everything that followed. To understand why William acted with such finality, it is necessary to return to the moment the secret first stepped out of the shadows, and to the man no one expected would be the one to carry it there. The memo arrived on a Tuesday morning, and did not appear extraordinary at first glance. It was one page, distributed through the palace's internal correspondence system, written in the controlled language senior staff saw every day. Normally, it would have been acknowledged, filed, and forgotten, but the people who read this one did not put it away. They read it again. Then they looked up from their desks with the expression of people who understood that something permanent had shifted, and that no one was going to explain it to them directly. The memo concerned Queen Camilla's household finances, travel budgets, staffing allocations, discretionary accounts, operational spending, the structure that allowed her office to function as the office of a queen consort. All of it had been placed under immediate suspension, pending what the memo described only as a review of expenditure. There was no timeline, no context, no explanation. Only the authorization line at the bottom revealed how serious it was. The order had not come from Camilla. It had not come from Charles. It came from the office of the Prince of Wales. William had signed off on it. Those who knew palace life understood at once that the wording was deliberate. A review of expenditure was not, in formal terms, an accusation. It was ordinary language, almost harmless on paper. But inside a royal household, where financial arrangements connected to a queen consort had never been interrupted by anyone except the sovereign, the phrase landed with unusual force. By 9 that morning, the corridors had taken on that distinct hush only a palace can produce when something serious has happened, and nobody has permission to speak about it. Staff moved carefully. Conversations shortened. Doors opened and closed a little more quietly than usual. Work continued, but beneath it another current had already begun to move. What made that silence louder was a single absence. Camilla was not there. A routine engagement had been listed in her diary that morning, a modest charity visit she had been expected to complete without much attention. It was cancelled, not postponed, not rescheduled, simply cancelled, with no explanation beyond a brief notice. Her office door remained closed. Her personal secretary appeared in the corridor, looked around, and left without going inside. A staff member arrived to collect her morning correspondence and found the tray untouched. She always took it herself. Later, that staff member would quietly say to a colleague that in all the years of service, she had never once left those letters sitting there. William had been seen leaving a private meeting with legal advisers shortly after 7. By 8:15, the memo had circulated. By 9, the palace understood that something had begun that could not easily be undone. What none of them yet understood was where it had truly started, or who had finally given William the reason to act. Charles had known since the previous evening. Those closest to him would later describe the hours between that conversation and the following morning as some of the hardest they had ever witnessed in his presence. Not because he had lost control, and not because there had been any dramatic display, but because the strain was so quiet it was almost painful to watch. He had received information he could not unknow, and had spent the night carrying it alone. He cancelled dinner, a small detail to anyone who did not know his habits, but significant to those who did. He rarely disrupted that final private rhythm of the day. That night, he did. By morning, his composure had changed. It was not the stillness of a man at peace with a choice. It was the stillness of someone who had made a decision he could not take back and was now carrying it through the ordinary duties of the day, because the day, as always, would not stop for what he felt. Catherine said nothing publicly, which was not unusual, but those who watched her closely noticed a deeper reserve than normal. She was calm, attentive, exact in every visible way, and yet completely unreachable. It was not coldness. It was protection. Protection of William, protection of her children, and protection of the space around a decision she knew her husband had made and would not reverse. Anne carried on with a scheduled engagement, and completed it without deviation. Observers noted only that she seemed shorter than usual with those around her, her replies more clipped, her concentration set inward. Whether she had been told directly or had simply read the atmosphere was impossible to know. But few people alive understood the monarchy's silences better than Anne, and she read this one accurately. The staff felt it most directly. 2 members of Camilla's household office were told that morning that their schedules had been suspended, and that they should remain available for further instruction. No instruction came. They waited for hours, saying little, because by then they already understood that no one in the building was authorized to answer the question both of them were thinking. What none of them knew yet was that the chain of events had not begun in the palace at all. It had begun 6 weeks earlier with a meeting arranged through channels designed to leave no official trace between the king and the man Camilla had once been married to. The request came through a retired equerry, a man known only in the quiet circles that surround royal service, and trusted precisely because he had spent years giving no one reason not to trust him. No secretary logged the message. No diary entry recorded it. No administrative system touched it. The message was simple. Andrew Parker Bowles was requesting a private audience with the king. Charles and Andrew were not close, but they were not strangers either. They had moved through overlapping worlds for decades. Men connected by history, by class, by complicated proximity, and by the sort of shared restraint that allows old discomforts to be managed without ever being named. What made the request remarkable was the condition attached to it. Andrew wanted the meeting to remain completely off the books. No formal record, no staff present, no diary notation, no witness beyond the 2 men themselves. Charles agreed. Those who later learned of the decision described it as something between reluctance and inevitability, as though he understood the moment he heard the request that whatever Andrew had carried for all those years had now become too heavy for him to hold alone. The meeting took place on a Wednesday afternoon at a private country house belonging to the retired equerry. Not a royal residence, not a club, not any place connected to either man's public life. Just a discreet location far enough from the institution to keep the institution itself outside the room. What Andrew said there remained between them. But Charles's expression when he returned that evening stayed with the people who saw him. He did not look angry. He did not look shocked. He looked like a man who had finally been handed something he had long feared might exist and had spent years hoping he would never have to touch. He did not summon Camilla through the usual channels. No private secretary recorded the meeting. No official note arranged it. Word was sent through a single member of staff that he wished to see her privately that afternoon. The informality of the request was itself a warning. In a household where almost every serious interaction passes through some layer of structure, the absence of structure can say more than any formal message ever could. She came within the hour. The room Charles chose was familiar to both of them. A smaller sitting room away from the working side of the residence. A place without a desk, without official furniture, without the architecture of power. There was only a low table between two chairs, and on that table lay a single sheet of paper. Camilla looked at the document before she looked at him. It was a photocopy from the period after her divorce from Andrew, years before any formal future with Charles had existed. The paper described a private financial arrangement. On its own, it was not explosive, but what gave it weight was the implication behind it. It suggested that knowledge gained through proximity to royal circles had played a role in a negotiation that should have remained entirely personal. Charles did not accuse her. He asked one question, carefully and quietly. He asked her to help him understand the arrangement. The silence that followed lasted long enough to become its own answer. When Camilla finally spoke, she did not deny the paper. She did not call it false. She said it had been misread, that context had been stripped away, that what looked like leverage had really been part of a difficult private disentangling between two people ending a complicated shared life. She argued that the knowledge involved was not secret in the dramatic sense it now appeared to be, but part of what two people inevitably gather by living near the same circles for years. Charles listened without interrupting. When she finished, he did not challenge her directly. Instead, he asked the question that mattered most. Why now? Why had Andrew chosen to bring this forward after all these years? Camilla did not say the paper was untrue. She did not ask what, exactly, Andrew had shown him. She asked why he would do this to her. That response settled more than any denial could have. The meeting ended without resolution, and in that household, an ending without resolution was its own kind of conclusion. Charles did not reassure her. He did not explain what he intended to do. He did not even pick up the paper when she left. It remained exactly where it had been placed, like something neither of them wanted to claim and neither could ignore. Within 48 hours, the palace's financial office received new instructions. They did not come through Camilla's household. They came through the king's private secretary to the keeper of the privy purse, the official responsible for the finances of the royal household. The wording was careful, requesting a full review of expenditure associated with the Queen Consort's office over the previous 3 years. The keeper of the privy purse had served long enough to know that this was not routine. He asked 2 questions. The first concerned scope. The second concerned who had been informed. The answer to that second question told him everything. William had not simply been notified. He had been included from the start. His office had been copied into the chain of instruction, and his role was not observational. He was part of the process itself. Senior legal advice was sought, not to investigate but to advise. That distinction mattered because investigation implied a conclusion waiting to be reached, while advice implied the institution was testing the extent of its own authority. The answer, when it came, was precise. The sovereign held wide discretion over internal household finances. No outside body needed to be involved. No public procedure was required. The matter could be managed entirely within the monarchy's own walls. And once that was established, the machinery began to move. If you're still with this story, this is the point where everything turns. So pause for a second, like the video, and keep listening. Because from here the private secret becomes a public shift, and every small detail starts to mean something much bigger. The first visible change was Camilla's diary. 3 appearances scheduled for the following 2 weeks disappeared. A hospital visit, a patronage reception, and a ceremonial engagement where she had been expected to represent the crown were all removed without replacement dates. Staff who managed royal calendars understood the meaning instantly. A scheduling conflict with no reschedule is not a conflict. It is a withdrawal. 2 members of her office were quietly reassigned over a weekend. Their desks were cleared. Their access was changed. No formal announcement was made. Colleagues were told only that both had been moved into support roles elsewhere. Then came the softer signs. The official website adjusted the language used around her patronages. The edits were minor enough that most readers would never notice them, but present tense descriptions softened into historical ones. Active phrasing became more distant. Ongoing became long-standing. It was subtle, almost invisible, but anyone who understood palace communications knew what it meant. Distance was being created without explanation. Then the administrative hold was placed on the accounts connected to Camilla's household operations. Not a public sanction, not a legal freeze, just an internal hold, procedural in language and severe in effect. Travel spending, staffing costs, day-to-day operational funds, all of it now required added authorization. And only one office stood above that authorization: William's. One final meeting remained. Unlike everything before it, this one was not arranged through intermediaries. William asked to see Camilla directly, and she did not refuse. She was already in the room when he entered, seated by the window rather than near the door, the afternoon light behind her and the length of the room between them. William sat opposite her. He brought no papers, no folders, no visible evidence of the work that had led to that moment. The absence was deliberate. Whatever needed to be said no longer required proof between them. He told her he had not come to argue about documents or deliver another institutional consequence. There was something he needed her to understand that no memo and no review could express. Then he spoke of silence. Not the obvious silence of conflict, but the quieter one, the kind a child notices in great houses where painful truths are managed rather than spoken. He spoke of watching a woman learn that institutions do not always protect the people they claim to protect, that support can become conditional without warning, and that some people are left carrying that realization alone because there is no safe place inside the system to put it. He did not say the situations were identical. He made clear they were not. But he said that he had spent years watching what silence protected inside the monarchy, and what it cost the people around it. At some point, he said, he had decided he would no longer extend that silence merely because doing so was easier than the alternative. Camilla watched him closely. Something in her expression shifted, not into surrender, not into anger, but into recognition. When she answered, whatever she said remained in that room. William never repeated it, and neither did she. But something changed between them, not peace, not warmth, something harsher and more honest than either. A truth long understood had finally been spoken aloud. William left first. Camilla remained by the window after he was gone. Outside, the palace carried on as though the afternoon were ordinary. It was not. The first report appeared on a Thursday morning, and significantly, it did not appear in a tabloid. It appeared in the financial pages of a broadsheet newspaper, written in restrained, precise language. The report mentioned an administrative hold on accounts linked to a senior member of the royal household pending internal review, authorized at the level of the heir's office. No names were stated directly. None were needed. By early afternoon, every major outlet in the country had the story. Editors understood exactly what those few sentences implied. A financial hold, a senior royal household, authorization from the heir. The spaces between those phrases were not empty. They were the story. Constitutional commentators quickly divided. Some argued the monarchy was proving capable of regulating itself from within. Others saw something more serious, a transfer of practical authority no one could formally declare, but everyone could recognize. Before long, Andrew Parker Bowles's name began circulating online. Someone connected the unofficial meeting to the review, and public curiosity took over. Why now? Why him? What had he known? And for how long? The palace issued only one sentence. The household would not comment on private financial matters. Its brevity said everything. By then, silence was no longer discretion. It was the last form of control still available. Then came the public appearance that made everything impossible to ignore. A national commemoration had been scheduled for months at one of the city's oldest churches, the kind of event the royal family could not cancel without creating a second story. It went ahead. The cars arrived separately, a detail photographers noticed immediately, because in royal life, arrivals are language. Who enters with whom? In which order? In which vehicle? All of it means something. The separation was subtle, but unmistakable to those who knew the usual pattern. Inside the church, the seating arrangement completed the message. Charles and Camilla sat in the same row as protocol required, but the distance between them remained visible. A small gap, but in royal imagery, gaps can say more than speeches. William sat several rows ahead with Catherine and never looked back. Catherine revealed nothing beyond composed attention. The image that spread everywhere was taken during the final hymn, a wide photograph showing the royal seating area, and, in the middle of it, the unmistakable empty space between Charles and Camilla. The camera did not interpret it. The public did. Camilla left before the formal end of the service. Her security presence was reduced. The route, the timing, the departure itself all suggested recalibration. No announcement followed. It was how the monarchy handled its deepest internal changes, not by declaring them, but by allowing them to settle into ordinary life until they no longer required explanation. Camilla later moved to a country residence outside the immediate orbit of the working household. Officially, it was described as a personal arrangement. In practice, it created distance that was geographic, symbolic, and unmistakable. Her patronages continued to list her name, but palace-coordinated invitations began arriving less often, then almost not at all. The organizations adjusted without protest. Charles continued with public duty, as he always had, carrying out engagements, speeches, ceremonies, and formal obligations with the steadiness expected of him. Yet those closest to him noticed that something had dimmed. Not his discipline, not his commitment, something more personal than that. The warmth he once brought into private conversations remained, but thinner now, as though a part of him had retreated behind the structure of duty and chosen to stay there. William said nothing publicly, because he did not need to. The authority he now held inside the institution did not come from making noise. It came from having faced a costly decision and not stepping away from it. Andrew was never officially connected to the fallout. For a brief period his name moved along the edges of public speculation, and then, as such names often do, it drifted back into the margins. He had done what he had decided to do. The consequences belonged to others now. What remained after the noise settled was not exactly rupture and not exactly resolution. It was something harder to name, the condition a family reaches when something true has finally been said and cannot be unsaid. From that moment forward, whatever came next had to be built on ground that had permanently shifted beneath them. The palace doors did not close behind her all at once. They simply began to open less often. And in the private spaces where that family had always carried what it could not say aloud, that quiet change proved heavier than any public statement ever could. If you made it all the way to the end, Leave your thoughts below, like the video, and subscribe for more stories like this, because sometimes the most powerful decisions are not the ones announced in public. Sometimes they happen in silence, behind closed doors, and leave the deepest mark of all.